Hello and welcome to another episode of Attacking Third, a CBS Sports soccer podcast. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's episode, we're doing a year in review, U.S. Women's National Team style. But before we get into all of that, today is the last day to vote for us. We are nominated in the Signal Awards for Best Episode. We couldn't do it without you, the listeners. So please, please, please click on the link in this episode description and vote for us. It only takes a second and it would mean so, so much to have your support. It would be a Christmas gift for me and Lisa if you could go ahead and give us that vote. Lisa, it's a big week for holidays. How you
It
doing?
it is a very big week. Just making it through to the weekend. That's what we're pushing for. A lot of people are going to work this week, so hopefully this episode provides everyone a little bit of light, fun look at the U.S. Women's National Team and everything that they did in 2022. Because Christmas is around the corner. You've got your festive hat on, your festive shirt. I've got my festive shirt on as well. We're just living for the holidays. Still no snow here yet in Philly. Don't worry, I'll keep everyone updated on that. But the
Oh, yeah.
rain has subsided, so we're
Joey?
happy about that front. But it's just pushing for the weekend at this point.
Always gotta always gotta let the folks know how the weather is in our
I
area. I
know.
love I love that about us. We definitely got a little bit of snow, frozen rain. I would also argue as well. So it was like the perfect amount for me. Like just the light dusting where it's like
Mhm.
people aren't gonna get too out of control and it's just enough to look pretty, perfect,
That is like
perfect
the
amount.
perfect amount,
Yeah.
honestly. Too
So
much, and then it's like becomes a mess, especially when you live in the city. It's like, where do we put the snow? How does it melt if you don't have subway under you? It's like a whole situation.
yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, so I'm like this is nice. It's setting like the scene for some good like holiday backdrop. So again, yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy Thursday, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah. You're already in the process of celebrating those things. So we're looking forward to celebrating and spending time with our loved ones as well. But with this type of week also comes the whole concept of like doing a reflective episode or doing reflective pieces or looking back on the year that just took place. And of course, we are going to do that today with the United States Women's National Team and the 2022 calendar year. We're going to go chronologically, but we're really going to probably take deeper dives onto things that really kind of stood out for us with in terms of covering this team in 2022. So there's no better place to start than at the top. This team started out their 2022 with their annual January camp. It was a little different in the sense where it wasn't a big massive kind of ID type of camp. It was still kind of roughly around, I believe it was like 23 to 26 players.
Mhm.
But this camp didn't have any friendlies attached to it. It was just an extensive camp for players to sort of get back into the mix with each other. And we already know that that's going to be different in 2023 because US Soccer said, yes, there's going to be the January camp. It is going to take place in New Zealand, and there are going to be not one, but two friendlies, and it is going to be against the co-host nation of New Zealand. So already a little bit of different energy from 2022 to 2023. But I think because of that, knowing that there was just going to be the camp, that made us a little bit more excited for something like She
Right.
Believes Cup, which ended up taking place in like, February, March.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference between last year and this year already is because in 2023 the team is preparing for a World Cup, as is everyone else, as are we. But She Believes Cup last year happened in February, like it usually did in Carson and in Frisco, Texas, and California, and it featured Iceland, Czech Republic, and New Zealand. The United States won it. It was their fifth She Believes Cup title. But if you remember, Sandra, they didn't start out maybe as strong and as dominant as fans would have liked. It was a 0-0, 0-0 Czech Republic draw to start this She Believes Cup for the United States. They then go on to smack New Zealand 5-0 and then smack Iceland 5-0. We had a lot of different goal scorers. Mallory Pugh, I believe she had 4 in this or 3 in this. She had a couple of braces in a game, and the game against Iceland, Christine Ewis got on the board. We saw Katarina Macario score goals. Ashley Hatch was also part of this roster for She Believes Cup. But this was also the start of, from the January camp to the She Believes Cup, the start of where we saw a lot of consistency from Vlatko Andonovski about the types of players that he was going to bring into these rosters, leaning a little bit more towards some newer players in Hatch, and getting Mallory Pugh back into the swing of things, and Sophia Smith. And this was when he turned a page and opened people up to the idea of the consistency that would be throughout this year.
Yeah, we definitely talked a lot about sort of those next gen players, right? The players who are, that we're going to likely be covering and speaking about, in the next decade in front of us. And that we started to see that page turn a little bit, right, in the final international window in 2021, when they took the team to Australia, and we saw a bunch of young players,
Yeah.
or players who hadn't been called in for some time, make their return to that international window and make that trip to Australia. And then we got to see 2022, the continuity of that. So, looking at that She Believes Cup, I think it was supposed to be what maybe folks were looking at as that kind of first test in terms of like getting a look at these players all together. But I also remember that there was there's always that goofy discourse, about like the teams and the competition that they're playing in front of them. And when it got announced with Czech Republic and Iceland and New Zealand, some of the press conferences around there was talking about the teams that got invited to this, and how there were certain teams that were lined up and scheduled to play within the 2022 edition of the She Believes Cup, but because of the ongoing pandemic and scheduling conflicts and things like that, they ended up having to reach out to other teams. And so this was the She Believes Cup that was in front of the players, and they ended up, taking it on and tackling it well. And for all of the conversation in that discourse that was surrounding some of the opposition, they opened that She Believes Cup with the 0-0 draw against Czech Republic. And I think that was probably the earliest part of some of the discourse in 2022, where it was like, what's going on with Andonovski? These players aren't getting it together, et cetera, et cetera. There was I think that was for me, the earliest point in the year where there was a lot of that kind of discourse that continued, to follow the team throughout 2022. And then they followed it up with a pair of April friendlies against Uzbekistan. And there was, again, the continuity of that. It's hey, we had a team, certain teams that were targeted in this window. Unfortunately, that did not come to light. We reached out, and now we're playing Uzbekistan. And, those were really big lopsided scores. We're talking about 18 goals over this window in April for these against these two teams. So it's folks were just saying, I think it was a mixed bag of results. But I appreciated the She Believes Cup for what we got to see develop on the pitch. I think we started to see Andonovski and the coaching staff really kind of center in on a trio or even a quartet of players that they wanted to see get more time together and develop that chemistry. We really started to see Mallory Pugh, Sophia Smith, Katarina Macario really getting that extended time together. Rose Lavelle in the mix, trying to see how the kind of that quartet can continue to develop. And it was promising. I think all of us were really excited to take a look at 2022 and sort of see that trio or quartet of players throughout it. But unfortunately, this was also a year that was plagued by a lot of injury. And so because of that, we had to hit the brakes. It was a pause on sort of, getting to see and watch the development between certain players. And we should probably chat a bit about that, because maybe 2022 for some folks could be the year of the injury.
I think that's putting it lightly. There was so many devastating injuries that took place in 2022. And then specifically when we look at just the U.S. women's national team and some of the top talent that has been called into these camps and getting senior national team caps, and then that they are plagued with injury. It started with Tierna Davidson, defender for the U.S., also plays for Chicago Red Stars, announcing that she has torn her ACL. Then Lynn Williams also dealing with a hamstring injury. Those came early in the year in March. It's kind of crazy to think that we were without those two players for most of this year, in what they were able to do. And I think that opened a lot of question marks across the back line, specifically without Tierna Davidson, because she was a mainstay for Vlatko Andonovski as a center back role alongside Becky Sauerbrunn, really it groomed to take over that center back leadership role in what she was able to do. And this now opened up a giant gaping hole in the middle of the United States backline in losing Tierna Davidson. So that happened in March, also with Lynn Williams announcing her injury that she would be out for the rest of the NWSL season. That happened in March. I mean, I guess one of the brightest spots is that at this point in Tierna Davidson's recovery, she is expected to be available for January camp selection. So this was when injuries started happening in 2022, and ones that are still happening up until this point, late December of 2022. People are always circling those teams and then counting down the months until the World Cup. And that's exactly what fans started doing when we heard about Davidson and Williams. And then from there, we go on to hear that star striker Katerina Macario, who played for Lyon, ends up tearing her ACL after coming off of a Great She Believes Cup, where we were looking at a different front line for the United States, because with Katerina Macario in that front line alongside players like Smith, Pugh, Alex Morgan, Macario added a new look, playing a withheld 9, dropping back deeper into the midfield. So that announcement of her injury in June was stifling for U.S. women's national team fans, for the teams. It was like, okay, let's count the months until we hope she could be back. Vlatko Andonovski has reported that she's at the FIFA rehab center, and she's expected to be back by late February from this injury. And then the fourth in a quadruple of sad injuries, forward Kristen Press announcing that she tore her ACL in June. This is her first season playing in LA with Angel City in the NWSL and with the national team. This was going to be her year, right, with club and with country, finally playing back in the NWSL. And she announces that she tore her ACL. So that was another one. Fans had to count the months and say, how far until the World Cup? How long for this player to start their recovery and get back on the pitch?
It was like one after the other. I think that was what was so jarring about the injury list in 2022, that it was just A, it was constant, and B, it was just like one after the other. I think with Williams, and although it wasn't an ACL, it's a leg, there's ligaments, right? The ongoing hamstring injury. You've got Williams and Davidson is like back to back, like in March, and then you've got a Macario and a Press. It's back to back in like June. It's like the way in which these injuries were occurring, it just was like it felt constant, and it just felt like one after the other. So it just feels kind of jarring, and it kind of set in motion a lot. Again, the continuity of all the question marks right around this team. It's like, oh, and then the whole concept of like, here's another test, and here's another test, and here's this next test for this group of players throughout 2022. But with the injuries, with players out on maternity leave, right? Because Vlatko Andonovski has constantly kind of included players collectively within players who are absent from the team in 2022. It was always a combination of players who were dealing with injury or players working their way back from maternity leave, whether that was a Crystal Dunn or somebody like a Julie Ertz, who has constantly been asked about in these press conferences despite no real updates, or somebody like a Casey Kruger, who he has brought up in press conferences as well. So what was that going to look like in a year that held such a big moment for this team, which was the Concacaf W Championship? And I think what that did, we already started this 2022 talking about how that beginning turn of the page was actually flipped, and we started to see these real glimpses of these sort of next gen players. But that also opened the window for even more of these players to sort of get into the mix, into the pool and conversation of players on this roster. We saw the return of Naomi Girma, with this team in 2022 after being drafted number 1 overall with San Diego Wave. It was her first time back with the senior team in camps, I believe, since 2019. And I think even then, I don't think people anticipated what somebody like Girma was going to bring and provide for this team in such a state of necessity, because
Yeah.
it was necessary. It was like, what's happening in these center back positions, because we also actually didn't even mention Becky Sauerbrunn. This was a player who had some work done ahead of this NWSL season on her right knee as well. So was out for an extended period of time. So we saw somebody like Alana Cook, right? Kind of like this last center back standing
Yeah.
in between, a position that kind of saw a lot of injuries, whether it was to Davidson or Sauerbrunn very early in the year, or Abby Dahlkemper, who we now know has constantly been navigating a dangerous back injury. She announced that she had surgery already in 2022 during this offseason. So kind of like this combination of like, here's Alana Cook, she's this last center back standing, and Becky Sauerbrunn is eventually working her way back in. We've got to get some more depth in this position. And here is Naomi Girma coming off of this outstanding, at the time, it was like a first half of her NWSL season, and they're bringing her in for these June friendlies against Colombia.
Right.
And this was like the final prep before this team went off to Mexico to compete for a World Cup qualification spot in July.
I mean, even when Germa was with San Diego, it was also this big question mark around the Wave and kind of how they were competing in the NWSL,
Yeah.
because no one really knew what to expect from this new expansion side with a new coach in Stoney and new ownership and everything. It was brand new. So to
Mhm.
kind of watch Naomi Germa develop throughout the NWSL season and continue to see Vlatko Ananovsky pick her out individually and say, we need you. And then to have such a young player as a rookie in the professional league, she just graduated from Stanford, then step into the one of the most difficult positions, frankly,
Yeah.
on the soccer field as a center back, because you can't make any mistakes. You have to lead the team. You have to be vocal. You have to organize everything defensively.
Yep.
And Germa just stepped in there seamlessly alongside Alana Cook for most of those friendlies in June before the Concacaf W Championship. And little did we know that that would be the future, right, of these center backs, of Germa being the one to step in there and solidify her spot. She rose to the occasion tremendously. And we saw that throughout the CONCACAF W Championship, because the United States went into this and they end up winning their 9th CONCACAF championship. They shut out all of their opponents throughout this tournament. No goals against during it. They played Haiti, Jamaica, Mexico, Costa Rica. And then they end up playing Canada in the CONCACAF W championship final. And it's a 1-0 win for the United States with a goal from Alex Morgan. But we also saw some injuries throughout this tournament
Yeah.
as well. And with that, opened up a spot for another player and a new face, because Ashley Hatch ends up getting injured in the middle of this July CONCACAF tournament, which ended up being qualifiers for the World Cup, opening up qualifiers for the Olympics and the W Gold Cup in 2024. And with that, Ashley Hatch, forward for Washington Spirit and the U.S., had to go home back to the United States to start her recovery on her back injury, which opened up the opportunity for Portland Thorns midfielder Sam Coffey, another rookie in the NWSL, to join the United States. She ends up joining the team and gets 90 minutes and continues to play and really steps into that role. So early on, right? This is July of 2022. We're seeing two young players get their first senior caps, and not only just getting caps in a couple of minutes here and there, but solidifying their spots and their roles on this team in Naomi Girma and Sam Coffey.
100%. I think that June window, I think, was a little bit of another turning point maybe for this team. And for me, July was it. Like July 2022 was like a really top moment for me. I don't want to speak for you, but I know we really enjoyed doing the coverage of the CONCACAF W Championship. It was a real opportunity to sort of get an even deeper look at this team and how they're going to look during a very intense kind of international tournament. and that June window ahead of this tournament, getting a Germa in the mix, a Kornieck in the mix,
Yeah.
Taylor Kornieck in the mix as well, Sam Coffey in the mix. I mean, that was part of why that wasn't a like for like swap. I think that's important, and that you mentioned that, because you've got a striker in Hatch, and then you've got a defensive midfielder in Coffey. So this wasn't a like for like swap. Coffey had already been with the team at this point. In that June window.
But she
Hey,
didn't play.
but
She
she
didn't get
didn't
any
play.
minutes. Yeah.
So they were like, you know what? You need to come on in and be with the team. You're one of the players that has sort of already been in this with this specific group. So sort of watching this team, put together the performances that they did. I mean, watching Sophia Smith, at this point in the midway of the year, kind of continue her very impressive year. Um, it was really, really cool to watch. I think there was so much chatter about, like, we need to see this group tested, and they haven't gotten a real test yet. And there was still, Lisa, there was still some of that
Yeah.
in this competition. The CONCACAF disrespect was too much for me. You know how much we love CONCACAF, and we don't want it to ever be disrespected. But there was still some of that in this competition as well. People saying like, oh, like, what is it, really to go up against a Mexican side that struggled, in the tournament that they hosted, or Jamaica, or
Yeah.
really not getting a look until really not maybe getting tested until Canada, baloney,
Mhm.
right? Like Haiti, like, what does
Baloney.
Haiti look like? Like, so it was very interesting time, and I loved it. July was probably one of my favorite months to cover this team during the year. Um, but I think it was important because, like, they had lost. At this point, we knew that they were not going to have a Katerina Macario going
Yeah.
into this. They were not going to have a Kristen Press, and it also kind of was like this idea, this point in the year in which the coaching staff was like, okay, we're going to start integrating the veterans back in,
Uh-huh.
because we saw Alex Morgan
Yeah.
and Megan Rapinoe get
Yep.
reintroduced to this team in 2022, and they had not been collectively called into the team since like October of 2021. So that was also a big storyline, adjacent to the fact that this was a group of players who hadn't had a lot of time to play with each other throughout maybe the 6 months that they had already been competing with each other. So that was a very exciting time for me, and I know for you and for us here at the show. And they followed that up with later friendlies in the later stage of the years. They had the couple of friendlies against Nigeria. We were very excited about that. A 4-0
Yep.
victory, and then a 2-1 victory, a little bit more narrow. We were very excited about that them going up against that team as well. We talked a lot about what maybe those results might have looked like if Nigeria had actually also had their full squad at their disposal, because they were a team at the time during that window that were also dealing with a bit of an
Mhm.
injury bug. But it set up the stage for kind of the latter moments of this year. And of course, alongside those friendlies, we got to talk about this historic CBA that this team signed during this window as well. A long time coming. I think we were celebrating it, as the news came through and was released. The ongoing negotiations between both the United States women's national team, the U.S. men's national team, and U.S. soccer to finally get this done. And the team went ahead and put pen to paper, and the collective historic CBA was signed. It was very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, following the NWSL CBA that was signed at the start of the NWSL season, and then having the U.S. soccer CBA being signed, it was an incredible, historic moment, right? Because the CBA was signed by both national teams, the men's and the women's. But this one was specifically for the women's CBA after this Nigeria match that was actually played in Philadelphia at Subaru Park. And that was something that was super cool as well, because this was such a long time coming. There were so many meetings with these players, so many fights, so much decisions and discussions and negotiations that had to take place with this. And by doing this, they got more money for themselves. They got not just equal pay, but also equal representation. And I mean, this CBA was just historic. It was the year of the CBA, frankly, like in the domestic league, in the NWSL, and then with US soccer, and it being already put into place, right, with the Men's World Cup that just concluded this past weekend. And because of that, like the overall equal pay fight saw a reckoning in September of this year with the women's team.
I think this is maybe the moment in the year where we could look at as sort of the feel good moments of the year. We're talking about a team with a lot of players who maybe hadn't had a lot of time together, but they were picking up dubs, right? They were getting the wins along the way. In 2022, the announcement of the CBA, that was very exciting. All of these players are part of a very historic moment for this team and its program's history. And then we kind of turned to the latter stages of this year, where maybe we got to talk about it as, perhaps it was a bit of a gray area, for the team this year. Because right after that, you roll into October, and the U.S. Soccer commissioned investigative report by Sally Q. Yates is released in early October. And it essentially, goes through a lot of the investigation was of all of the allegations of sexual abuse and harassment within women's professional soccer. And it's a very, very stark report. I believe it was over 300 pages. We did a ton of episodes on it. If people need a recap of that, please, check out those summaries as well. But there was it was difficult report to get through with all of the findings. And it dropped just ahead of another big moment for this team. They were going to go to Europe and play in an October window against England and Spain. And England, a big July of their own, they came out as champions of Europe. They're the Euro 2022 champions. So they were going to play in Wembley. There was a lot of sparkly, bright things to talk about in the build up to this game. And the report, it almost just sort of sucked the air out of that, at least in terms of this side of the pond, right? It was just so disheartening and saddening to sort of go through all of that. And then we have these players in a camp overseas, right? And we see these players, Becky Sauerbrunn specifically, Alana Cook specifically, we hear from Megan Rapinoe specifically, coming out of these camps, fielding questions about these things. And, Becky Sauerbrunn, the captain of this team, saying, I'm just going to put it out there now because I'm going to get asked, we're not okay. That it was just, again, it was just very, very, very difficult to get through all of that. And I think it's important for us to take note of that in light of this window, right? That October window, because it's their first two losses of the year in 2022. And they did, I think, their best to try to celebrate a very big moment in terms of two very good programs going head to head with England and Spain, and a massive record crowd at Wembley Stadium. There was a lot to celebrate there, and I think they tried to do their best to take it all in. But I can't imagine what that was like to have to go through that international window in light of all that dropping.
Exactly. And with the results of the Yates investigation, players saying that they still had to play, right? Even though there was a break in domestic play in the NWSL, the national team was still competing. They could be together, right? Which I think is also a bright spot in that they at least had each other in those moments when they were traveling and in Europe for these friendlies. But with the Yates investigation results dropping, they also dropped recommendations for U.S. soccer to do. And one of those was creating a task force in U.S. soccer's membership in order to provide safety around that. And so that dropped in early October, this investigation with the recommendations and the next steps for U.S. soccer to take. And by December, it was announced that Mana Shim was going to be the chair of the Participant Safety Task Force for U.S. soccer. So I think it's so important to see that within 2 months span, right? I mean, of the results dropping and the investigation report, that Mana Shim, who was a very a person very much involved in this, that came forward, put her face and her name to these results and this investigation, and was one of the handful of players that started this ball rolling about, let's uncover some of these horrible things that have happened, that she then becomes the chair of the Participation Safety Task Force for U.S. soccer in early December. So it was quickly turned around, and hopefully steps being made in the right direction, right? I'm trying to find like the
Yeah, silver
coupling of the
lining.
silver lining
Yeah,
that comes with the devastation that was
yeah,
the Yates reports. But at the same time, the U.S. then dropped games, and a lot of fingers were pointed at this team and at Black Leninowski about what are they doing, playing against European champions England, going to Spain and playing a game, and why aren't they winning these games? Why aren't they just dominating at this point? And I think we learned a lot about the world of women's football at that point, and understanding that
yeah.
the competition is really tight, and these other nations are incredibly good and talented. And that was the preparation that I think this team needed at that point, to kind of reflect on, especially being in Europe, not playing at home, record crowds at Wembley, playing for the first time in Paloma, Spain against the Spanish national team. These were really big tests for the United States that they needed to have in that moment. And I think when I reflect on it now, not being so in the moment with it in October, it was good for this team, right? To have those
Yeah.
challenges. Maybe the timing wasn't great,
Yeah.
coupled with the Yates report, but
Yeah.
the challenges on the pitch were good for them.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we wanted to see certain things during those friendlies, and I think we still got to see them. We talked a lot about how Trinity Rodman was getting, call ups into these national team camps, and that we wanted to see her get a chance to start in some of these games. And my goodness, I mean, there was a goal that was called back that she had scored against England, and I think we're talking about that particular game very differently if it ends in a 2-2 draw versus a 2-1 loss, which is how it went down in the record books, right? But it was such a great moment in terms of the stage that it was, and to see not just Rodman perform well, but Smith performing well. I think it provided a different level of excitement around some of the younger players that maybe folks weren't hadn't reached yet in those beginning matches of the year, right? It was different watching this type of talent go up against these sort of top ranked teams versus against like in Uzbekistan. So there was different energy, I think, coming out of these friendlies despite the two consecutive losses. It ended a streak for this team, right? 71 home game unbeaten streak that was ended when they came back in November and went up against Germany. I don't know if anybody had planned or predicted in 2022 that the United States women's national team would go on a 3-game losing streak. But that also happened in 2022. A couple of friendlies against Germany, both 2-1 scorelines, one which they dropped against Germany, and then the other they closed out their calendar year with a victory, 2-1. I liked these friendlies. They
I
were tough to get through, but they were fun to watch.
These friendlies were incredibly fun to watch. I mean, the talent that this German side had, and the questions that they posed to the United States, and the fact that they did lose that opening match against Germany, going on that 3-game skid, and then the first loss at home. I think to then follow it up with a 2-1 win with goals from Smith and Pugh in that match in New Jersey at Red Bull, it was the way for this team to finish the year. They still conceded one to Germany in that match, but the turnaround and the difference between these two games, and what these players were able to do, the type of competition that we saw. I mean, this was a top 5 team in Germany, right? That's exactly who the United States needs to be playing. Those are the question marks that they can be posed, and we saw them make changes and adjustments from the first game to the second game. We saw a little bit more fight and a little bit more grit from this this United States team to close out the year in this match against Germany. And that's how they did it, because they end on a win. They ended with some announcements for the 2023 year, but these November friendlies against Germany back in the United States were a way for them to kind of close out this year and put a stamp on it with the win over Germany 2-1, and then turn the page to 2023, a World Cup year, and what they're going to bring, because the competition is not slowing down. And now that they've faced those tests against England, Spain, Germany, they can continue to plow forward and understand the growth, because all the injuries we talked about, those players are also coming back, and they've been watching all year. They saw what happened against Germany. They saw what happened against England and Spain. So adding those pieces back in after they close out with a loss and a win over Germany is an interesting way to end the year. Maybe not the way that the U.S. wanted to end it, the way that fans didn't want it to end that way, but they end on a win. They end on a high note, and I think that's something to circle and put a star around.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm with you. I love that the World Cup is what's on the radar for this team. It was on the radar in 2022, and now as they are looking ahead to 2023, it's absolutely the biggest thing on the list. We also got the World Cup draw. We're going to talk about the World Cup draw and a few milestones right after a quick break.
Huddle up, NFL fans. It's almost Nickmas.
Merry Nickmas. Nickelodeon and the NFL are teaming up
for the ultimate holiday gift.
The Nickelodeon NFL Nickmas game.
I got 3 words for you: Broncos, Rams, and Santa.
Ho, ho, ho. This is going to be the best Christmas ever.
It's the Denver Broncos taking on the Los Angeles Rams in the Nickelodeon NFL Nickmas game. Christmas Day at 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. Only on Nickelodeon.
All right, let's keep chatting. United States Women's National Team 2022 year in review. The team qualified for the 2023 World Cup emphatically with a win in the Concacaf W Championship. And then there was a World Cup draw, and it kind of really put things into perspective. Drawn into Group E, USA is with Vietnam, the Netherlands, and they await the winner of a Group A Interconfederation playoff. Either Portugal, Thailand, or Cameroon will join the United States.
Yep. What a way to end the year for the U.S. with this World Cup draw. It was a spectacle, right? About who was going to be drawn. The fact that the U.S. is not in a group with Sweden is something that was interesting. And also Vietnam, a team that the United States has never played before. They'll also be in this group. But now that the United States has their competition for the World Cup and the group stages, it was like, okay, now we can continue to prep and to understand what we're going to do, because now we know who we're going to face against. It was also announced that all of the US's World Cup group stage matches would be played in New Zealand, perhaps giving them a bit more of an advantage compared to some of the other groups that will be traveling back and forth across Australia and between New Zealand and Australia. So a lot of answers given to the US and to fans with this draw, with who they're going to play, but we won't find out who that third team is between Portugal, Thailand, and Cameroon until the Intercontinental play-in tournament that happens in February. So just a few more weeks to find out about that. But honestly, once you know these teams, the preparation doesn't change that much, right? I mean, for the United States, with what they're going to do, they're going to go out there and play their own game. Maybe defensively, their tactics will shift a little bit, but not as much, right? It's just play our game, understand the players on the pitch, the rhythm that they're getting into, have a little bit of continuity with the lineups that we're seeing from Vlatko Andonovski, and reintroduce those players in 2023 that have been out for most of 2022.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about. It's just like, I feel like every episode that we do and every week that goes by, we're just getting closer and closer and closer to the big one, right? We'll just refer to it. And it's cool that within 2022, yes, in between the international windows and friendlies, in between the international tournaments, whether it was a She Believes Cup or a Concacaf W Championship, the players who were in and out of these international windows, of these camps, of these fixtures, there were a ton of milestones that were met along the way. And I think that kind of stuff is always celebrated. I think when we're talking about the United States women's national team, they're a program that have been around a long time, and B have a lot of resources, and they're able to keep track of all those really great things like milestones and career caps or goals, etc. Alex Morgan earning her 200th career cap, 10 of them just in this year alone, and just the 13th player in U.S. women's national team history to get 200 caps. So, this is like a number that might not be attainable, in depending on the player and depending on the program. And it's wild to me in a year like 2022, you have Alex Morgan reaching that milestone while somebody like a Sophia Smith, the player who's kind of going to be the face and the future of this team, went on this incredible run in 2022 as well.
Yeah, Sophia Smith had a breakout year. Heading into this year, she only had one international goal. She ends 2022 with 11 international goals, the most of any U.S. women's national team player this year. And she also became the youngest player to lead the United States in scoring in one calendar year since Mia Hamm did that at age 21 in 1993. It was a breakout year for Sophia Smith. It was incredibly fun to watch her, and also partnered alongside Alex Morgan, a player that you just mentioned got her 200th cap. I think that we saw that really come alive, and we saw the consistency between Sophia Smith, Alex Morgan, and Mallory Pugh in that front three lineup for Vlatko Andonovski. But this was a really big year for Sophia Smith. She then does so many things domestically, winning MVP of the league, of the championship game, lifting the NWSL trophy. It was a breakout year for the young superstar in Smith, and I just can't wait for that to carry on over into 2023. But there was also some big goalkeeper news this year, right? We saw the consistency of goalkeeper Alyssa Nair between the sticks for the United States. She hit her 50th career shutout this year, 5 shutouts in this calendar year because she split time a lot with Casey Murphy. That's another goalkeeper we saw get really consistent time this year. We also saw the likes of Aubrey Kingsbury play one game, get called up into a few camps, but it was Alyssa Nair who solidified herself with 50 career shutouts. Holy cow.
Yeah.
What an accomplishment for that type of player, especially when you're going up against some really big and tough competition throughout Concacaf W Championship. 5 shutouts for this team throughout the entire tournament. And also goalkeeper Ashlyn Harris, longtime U.S. women's national team goalkeeper. She announced her retirement this year. She won the World Cup in 2015, 2019, and she finished her national team debut. Her final game, was in January of 2020 with the U.S., but she announced her retirement from the game as U.S. Soccer says goodbye and see you soon to another great between the sticks and goal.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're mentioning 2 prolific goalkeepers who have had long histories in this program. I mean, Alyssa Nair, I was delighted by her 2022. We're talking about a player who picked up a significant injury during the Tokyo Olympic Games, was out for the remainder of that 2021 calendar year, and started to get, reintegrated back onto the pitch, and for somehow, some kind of way, looked stronger and faster on the pitch and in her position. Really looking at Alyssa Nair and sort of seeing, like, we always know she's been very someone who's had a very like cool, calm, and collected presence in between the pipes. But I don't know if people would say that something like coming off the line or quickness off the line was one of her strongest attributes, and I think she completely smashed that this year. So not only is she that very kind of cool-headed and very disciplined and organized a distributor in the pipes, but now she's looking really, really good in a lot of other areas as well. And I love the note on Harris and sort of how she's riding out to other areas of her career. And I think it's important to know that to close out this year, Adriana France got called back into these camps. So that goalkeeper pool is forever rotating. But one thing that we can point to and say is consistent in it is that Alyssa Nair is the number one. But let's keep talking about defense a little bit, because we love that here, right? On attacking third, Alana Cook, defender who led the team in minutes played, starting all 15 matches that she played, and totaling 1,1286 minutes. Look, we talked about in the first half of this episode how injuries really came in and played a role in this team. And Danovsky saying when they put together the roster for CONCACAF that injuries and maternity were something that shaped that. But Alana Cook, when we're talking about a constant, she was one of those figures in that position to sort of always be there for this team.
Yeah, leading the team in minutes. That's insane to have over 1,200 minutes played in one calendar year. And that's just with the national team. That doesn't include all the play that Alana Cook had with OL Reign in the NWSL. We also saw the return of Crystal Dunn. What a huge milestone for this player and for women, right? I'm just going to go out there and say that because Crystal Dunn was out for maternity leave for a majority of 2022, and she ends up returning to the pitch following the birth of her son, Marcel. Marcel was born in May, and then in September, Dunn was back training with the United States in their training camp, and by November, she had made the full training roster, and she was available for selection. We got to see Dunn playing again by the end of November for 3 caps in 2022 after she gave birth in May. That was fantastic to see, right? Coming back into the swing of things, getting some time in those matches, playing in the left outside back role, giving Emily Fox a little bit of a breather in some of those matches. But this was a milestone that I was so pleased and happy to see. And we knew that Crystal Dunn was fighting for this. She wanted to get back on the pitch. She continued training with her club team, Portland Thorns, throughout the majority of 2022, pretty much up until she gave birth. And then as soon as doctors would allow her back on the pitch after she gave birth. And the fact that she worked so hard, was fighting, was listening to her body, was working with incredible doctors to be able to play in an international friendly by the end of the year of 2022. I mean, she's a superwoman, super mom. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I think, one of the stories that kind of came towards the latter end of 2022 that everybody was just like, if no one else, of course, Crystal Dunn.
Yeah.
Right. It was quite a performance to witness. The United States, racking up other numbers in other areas, whether it's goals scored or attendance records, right? We talked a little bit about the October window and how that took place overseas. United States versus England at Wembley had record attendance, 76,893 in the turnstiles. To take a look at those two teams go head to head, it is the highest attended friendly in U.S. women's national team history. Tickets selling out, in about a day or so. Exciting moment for the team this year.
Huge for them to play at Wembley. The team in 2022 as a whole, they scored 56 goals this year, 56 celebrations on the pitch that we got to watch. And one thing that really stuck out to me in these stats is that through 14 games, 26 of the goals were scored by players under the age of 24. So not only were young players being called into the rosters and getting caps and getting minutes, but they were scoring goals and they were contributing. We saw it along the back line, right, with Germa and really stepping into that role. And Alana Cook, another young one, Emily Fox along that back line as well. But up the pitch, they were scoring these goals. So 56 of them, 26 goals scored by players under the age of 24. So the future is very bright for this team and these players.
The number 1 ranked team amongst the FIFA rankings. And look, we should also talk about these players who were newer to the team, because those are milestones as well. There are several players who earned first caps or made debuts. let's talk about Sam Coffey a little bit. Earned her first cap at the Concacaf W Championship, finished the year with 4 caps and 1 start, became the 250th player to earn a cap with the United States women's national team versus Nigeria. Played a full 90 in that game.
Huge for Sam Coffey. We got to see the start of her when she was called in late to the Concacaf W Championship, but she slotted in quite well. I mean, the defensive midfield position is still like a bit of a question mark. Vlatko Adanovsky is looking for competition at that role, looking for someone to take over it. And with a young player like Sam Coffey, she could be the answer. We've talked so much about this other player, defender Naomi Girma. She earned her first senior national team camp this year, which is crazy to think about because by the end of the year with the October friendlies, the November friendlies, we were like, well, Girma's got to be in the center back. There's no way we could play without her. And it's crazy to think that this is only the first year that she's played with the senior national team, getting caps. She's been called into camps before and she's gotten looks and she's been called up, but this was the first time that she got her very first cap. She started 8 of the 10 games that she played this year. She even earned an assist in one of these. So she's getting points. She's getting on this score sheet as well. And she had 6 90-minute appearances. Girma is the future of the center backs for this U.S. team.
I love it. I love the numbers. I love the stats behind this player, Naomi Girma, the revelation. That's absolutely who she was in 2022. Shout out to goalkeeper Aubrey Kingsbury, got her first and only cap in 2022, a 90-minute match during the She Believes Cup. Defender Carson Pickett also earning her first cap. Ended out the year with 2 caps and 2 starts. And defender Haley Mace also returned to the team this year as well. In light, again, of some injuries, right? We talked about injuries in that first half, but we saw Emily Fox go out with some injury, and we had Haley Mace to take a look at and sort of slot in if needed. But let's talk a little bit about Trinity Rodman, Lisa.
Trinity Rodman, this is another young player, 20 years old, that broke into the U.S. women's national team this year. She had seen sniffs. She was a namesay on the youth national teams for the United States, but she ends this year with 10 caps, 2 goals, a vital part of this front line, but also incredibly young. Like, this is the type of future that we're talking about, a 20-year-old in Rodman getting into this team after a stellar rookie year in the NWSL. That's what got Vlatko Adanovsky noticing her in 2021. Then 2022, she ends up making a difference. We also saw the likes of midfielder Taylor Kornieck, who earned her first senior national team call up, her first cap, She ended up playing 7 games in 2022. She even netted a goal, 1 for Taylor Kornieck. We saw her appear in the Concacaf W Championship. I mean, there were 7 players that made their debut this year, Sandra. 7 players.
Look, it's hard to imagine that in the year leading up to a World Cup that you've still got a ton of players earning first caps or making those sort of debuts and kind of hitting those types of milestones. But that happened in 2022 for this year. And honestly, I think that's a bit of a blessing. I think that's part of what comes with the territory of being the number 1 ranked team in the world, of being the team that has this reputation of a strong program, of a strong pool of players. And we got even more glimpses into the future because Alyssa Thompson, 18 years old, got her first call up and earned 2 caps, became the youngest player called up for a full national team camp since Sophia Smith, who was 16 in 2017.
Alyssa Thompson, this was a name that when the roster dropped, a lot of people were like, who is she? Who is she? I know we went live on here on Attacking Third on YouTube, and people in our comments were like, how do we know her? Who is she? Is she in college? What is she doing? No, she's 18 years old. She's not in college yet. And she was playing in the October European tour with this United States team. I mean, this is a player that proved herself, right? Playing with the boys team, a U17 boys team, and ends up coming in and making a difference. She's been in the youth programs, but this first senior national team call up and 2 caps for her. The future is incredibly bright. There were so many milestones, so many debuts for players, so many moments of history made with the signing of the CBA and the World Cup being announced and the draw and all of these players getting their debut, 7 of them this year. It was a very good year for the U.S. in 2022.
It absolutely was. Future's bright. The World Cup is next. We got next in the World Cup. 2023 is on the horizon for this team. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to everybody. Thank you all so much for joining and listening to Attacking Third. Download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us. Make sure you subscribe so you can see whenever we go live at youtube.com/attacking third. And a reminder to please vote for Attacking Third in the best episode in the Signal Awards. It means so much to have your support. Link is in the episode description, or you can hit the QR code in the YouTube video. Happy holidays, everyone. Have a great weekend. For Sandra Herrera and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.